Welcome to The Ally Effect with Allyson Blythe, authentically living life your way. We all contemplate making changes in our lives that would allow us to live more authentically, but it can be hard to take action. Allyson is here to educate, equip, and empower you with the tools you need to start authentically living life your way. Get ready to eradicate your limitations and destructive patterns as you take full responsibility for your own happiness. This show is not just talk. It is conversation for profound self-awareness, acceptance, and appreciation, the key elements to stepping into the power as the creator of your very best life. The Ally Effect with Allyson Blythe starts now.
Hey everyone, and welcome. You're listening to The Ally Effect, authentically living life your way with me, Allyson Blythe, certified life coach and licensed clinical social worker. You can join me the first and third Thursday right here on Transformation Talk Radio, as we have some real deep conversation about this concept of authenticity. Today, we have a lot to cover. We're going to address a very simple topic, and yet as we dive in, you might see not really quite so simple. Today's topic, communication, right? Lots and lots for us to be able to dig in. Get your pen, get your paper, because there's probably some notes you might actually want to be able to take. Communication, probably a topic that we're all familiar with. We've all heard that word. We all have a general sense. Perhaps you feel like you're pretty good at it. Maybe you've taken a course. Maybe you've even read a book and you have had some opportunity to kind of communicate and you feel like you're pretty effective at that. If that's the case, congratulations, because you're not like most people who wander into my office who are kind of fumbling around with communication, often wondering like what they want to say, how they want to say it, and what it is that goes so terribly wrong, even with the people that they most care about. So stay tuned. Today, we're going to talk about some typical patterns in communication, things that tend to really get in the way of effectively delivering your message and being able to even connect with people who you most care about. So one of the things I like to do is I'm kind of brainstorming topics and getting different ideas. I love to just do random Google searches. And so I did that with this topic of communication. And I have to share, I was blown away. When I typed into Google the word communication, there were over 3 billion results. As a matter of fact, I had to kind of like step back and count those zeros because I couldn't even really process the number. 3 billion different results. And I was like, okay, there's a lot of stuff, lots of different rabbit holes that we could go down in this topic. And I actually went down several of the different rabbit holes that I'll share a little bit about. But in order to simplify, I did what I really like to also be able to do. And I just got a basic working definition, this thing called communication that we all are familiar with. Maybe we really take it for granted. And so I just got a basic definition. Goodoldictionary.com defines it as the imparting or exchanging of information or news. I mean, that sounds so simple, doesn't it? Like exchanging or imparting of news and information. And so if it's really that simple, one, why are there over 3 billion results? And why do we have so many problems with actually effectively communicating? So even though it sounds so simple, we all know it doesn't really play out quite that way. Everything you do sends a message. Every single thing, every day, in every way, you're communicating something. Being able to be mindful of what you're saying, why you're actually speaking, and the words that you're using to convey your message can be a complete game changer. So as I was reading through all these different pieces and parts about communication, it was fascinating to me. And I think some of these next few things are all things that we know, but again, perhaps we kind of don't pay much attention to or understand how they actually affect communication. I was thinking about like different parts of actually the words and the ways we try to convey information. And there were 3 things. One is verbally. And I think when most people think about the concept of communication, they're thinking about the words they speak, All right. And as I was doing some of this reading and researching, I came across this. It's about 7% of your message. The actual words that you speak is only what they say to be about 7%. Now, that's pretty little, even though that's the focus and emphasis on so much of how people would define communication. It's actually a very teeny part. The rest of communication, how messages actually get delivered and what impacts, are the nonverbals. It's the body language, the facial expression, the body positioning, where you're standing or how you're standing, eye contact that you actually make. And if you've seen me for 5 seconds, the hand gestures, right? The gestures you make and different ways you're trying to convey information. And what they say is that actually is one of the most profound ways we can communicate. I'm sure you've heard the terms of it's not what you say, it's how you say it. I think that really illustrates this point. And then, of course, there's things that we do behaviorally or maybe don't do behaviorally that convey messages to. A slamming of a door might really indicate quite a message. Okay, so we've got the verbals, we've got the nonverbals, and then we've got the behavioral. Today, we're going to talk about some of the verbal things that you're probably using that are getting in the way of actually delivering your message. So if everything you're doing is communicating something, and it's at the heart of every single relationship in your family, in your workplace, in your neighborhood, and maybe even in traffic, right? I'm sure we've all had some of those nonverbals happen in its communicating messages, even in traffic. And yet what I find, and perhaps it might be the case for you too, is that rarely are we ever taught really powerful, effective, and accurate ways to communicate our message, what's actually happening and ways that we want to be able to deliver messages. We're going to identify today some things that really impact and interfere with that entire process. Dictionary.com did a great job of identifying the basic level of communication, but it wasn't really quite enough of what I was looking at and what I was kind of hoping to be able to address. And now, speaking of communication, I might be not necessarily pronouncing this woman's last name, but Elizabeth Bourget talks about another level of communication. She defines it as the lifeline of any relationship. Yeah, I mean, truly, any relationship that we have, a clerk at a grocery store, we're still wanting some level of communication or connectedness, perhaps effectiveness in being able to just get out of the store, right? Every single thing we do is communicating something. And then and this is going to be the heart of what we talk about today, George Bernard Shaw does a great job of really helping point out another difficulty. He says the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Yeah. How often do you walk away from a situation going, yeah, okay, I was really good at that, or yeah, I understand fully what that person meant, or you take a piece of the conversation and start to run with it. Yeah, understanding that a lot of times it's the illusion that people have actually communicated that creates so many problems. So part of these 3 billion pieces of information about communication, it was a lot of stuff to sort through. I started to think about and start to wonder, like, where did communication actually even begin? Like, how did we even start to do this thing of communicating with one another? And so as part of putting the pieces together, I was doing a little fact finding, and this is all just random stuff you can find. Probably if you want to sort through 3 billion too, you could probably see some of these facts. But the earliest documentation of any kind of communication actually were the symbols of cave paintings. They say it's 30,000 BC, right? Cave paintings. Can you imagine with today's technology and advancement, like still being able to just communicate in those levels of symbols? The pictogram came along later, and that was actually ways that people used symbols to convey concepts or objects, maybe identify a circumstance or an event that actually took place. And that was all the way at 9,000 BC. So we advanced from cave paintings to pictogram. And then the alphabet was started to be created in about 2000 BC, scripts and different letters that were taking shape in order to convey messages and create words. The telegraph and Morse code was Morse code, the first developed in 1836. 1836 with the Morse code. So from cave paintings, pictograms, now Morse code. And then I really do believe this was fundamental in the development of communication. Good old Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, right? The telephone. Alexander Graham Bell, 1876. The first fax was ever, and I still have a fax machine. People really laugh about that. But the very first fax was sent in 1964. All right. So we're really progressing here. The first mobile phone. Do you remember? I mean, were you around when those things? I mean, they were like this big. They were huge. My dad had one. It was 1981 for the first mobile phone. The very first email was sent in 1965. AOL came along in 1985. Facebook wasn't until 2004, with YouTube quick on its heels in 2005. Good old Twitter was the next year in 2006. And the iPhone, it's funny, I always associate the iPhone with the mobile phone, but the iPhone was in 2007, Instagram 2010, and then Snapchat the year after in 2011. My friends, we've gone from these primitive ways of communicating, conveying messages, all the way to this level of advancement and technology. So many different options. And honestly, within an instant, we have contacts, just like I did, just by typing something into the computer, to billions and billions of pieces of information, and perhaps even contact with that many number of people, right? There's been all this advancement and technology and ways that we can be able to relay information to each other. And yet I will sit right here, right now, to fundamentally challenge the fact that there is a core difference between conveying information, as that very simplistic definition first offered, versus really being able to communicate. I want to help you understand the essence of communication and understanding that it's so much deeper than just the imparting or exchanging of information. Okay. As I started to dig at different definitions and get some substance, I wanted some more meat on those bones so that we could really start to dissect and understand what else was there. I got two other definitions: an exchange of facts, ideas, opinions, or emotions between two or more people. All right. That's from Newman and Summer. That makes a little bit more sense, a little more substance. But I love Dalton McFarland's definition, and he talks about a process of meaningful interaction among human beings. More specifically, it's a process by which meanings are perceived and understandings are reached among human beings. That's some substance, because though we have all of these ways to communicate and try to understand each other, all you have to do is tune into the news to hear the staggering statistics of mental health and depression, anxiety, acts of harm to others, to themselves. Despite all of these methods to be able to communicate, people are struggling now more than ever. Clients are coming into my office. I'm sure people are walking into their homes, around their neighborhoods, and desperate to be able to somehow connect. People are at war. People are at war with themselves, and people are at war certainly with one another. Where is it that things go so far off the rails? How can we start to tune in and recognize what is it that we can start to do differently? Remember this quote, Elizabeth Bourget: communication is the lifeline of any relationship. Today, we're going to talk a little bit more to help you understand. There's no judgment in any of this, but I want to point out some patterns that you're likely to be engaging in that's making communication go way off the rails. We're going to take a break. And when we do, we'll come back and have an opportunity to dive just a little bit deeper. This is the Ally Effect with me, Allyson Blythe, certified life coach and licensed clinical social worker, authentically living your life. Come back and we'll talk more about communication. We're back here on the Ally Effect, authentically living life your way with me, Allyson Blythe. And we're going to continue. We're going to dive back into our conversation about communication. We're talking about why it's so critical and what is it that gets in the way of even basic communication. Before the break, I offered a quote from George Bernard Shaw, who said, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place." Today, we're going to try to walk through some of that to make sure we clear up that illusion. Trying to understand more about this concept of communication, I shared with you 3 billion results on Google. And so in order to narrow that down a little bit more, I actually typed in personal communication, hoping that that would pull it a little bit more and eliminate some of those other topics. And I was really surprised by what I found, because what came up in almost every single article, I don't remember quite how many, but what came up was workplace communication, right? And so article after article after article was really about how to communicate more effectively in the workplace. Fantastic, right? Like we need that. And it's such critical information. But as a matter of fact, I even deleted the search at one point and retyped it, personal communication, thinking that somehow I might have made an error. And sure enough, here comes workplace communication. There was information about how to reference communication. So if people had a conversation, how to actually document it and reference it in some ways. There was information about how to define it. Okay, still very critical. I've used several of those definitions in different types of communication, from letters to emails to conversations. Okay, all of that really, really helpful. But there was not anything that I could find in Google about how to actually effectively, personally communicate. And quite frankly, it was some evidence of where things might really be going wrong. If communication is really the lifeline of every relationship, as that one quote suggested, why is there not more information? Like, why are we not being flooded with resources and tools and information about how to actually connect and communicate so much more effectively? My hope is that today you'll get that information, at least a starting point for yourself. This is a show about authenticity. This is an opportunity for you to be equipped with some real empowering tools. And one of the most equipping tools I can ever offer you is the tool of self-awareness. Anyone who's worked with me for any period of time will know I'm always saying, tune in, be self-aware, pay attention. And as we go through these patterns, what my hope is that you will be able to recognize your own tendencies. It's easy to spot them in other people, right? But this is a show about authenticity and an opportunity to begin to understand your own patterns and perhaps even some of your own missteps. When it comes to talking, and when we couple it with the tool of self-awareness, I wonder if you've ever taken the time to stop and say, why am I talking? Right? Why am I actually using words? What am I hoping to accomplish? And what is it that I need from this conversation? Oftentimes when we go to the grocery store, we're pretty clear. We tend to make a list, or we got it on our phone or something. Like we know kind of have the purpose of our trip. And yet oftentimes we're using words and just randomly, or perhaps very haphazardly, and maybe even destructively, without knowing, why are you talking? The deliberate, intentional use of words is some of the most empowering conversation you can ever have. Could you imagine going into the kitchen and you just get out a steak knife, and every single thing you do in the kitchen is with a steak knife? Or you go out into the garage and you know you've got a job to do, but you go about and you grab the hammer And every single capacity of what you do during that day is that you're whacking it with a hammer. Time to turn on the faucet, you whack it with a hammer. Time to brush your teeth, you whack it with a hammer, right? Like, who would do that? We know better. And this idea that we go equipped with the proper tools in order to do the job. And yet I often find that people aren't equipped with even self-awareness of why they're speaking and what it is they need or what they're hoping to accomplish. And so then I started to think about a leg of communication of like, why do we even do it? Why do we enter into communication? And so I just brainstormed some random ideas, and some of these you can probably relate to. You probably could even add to the list, which I would certainly encourage you to do. But just the basics of communication, we're trying to convey or gather information, right? That's certainly one of the reasons why we use words. We're trying to collect details or facts about situations, maybe a timeline about something. So to give and to receive information, easy enough. Back to that basic definition of communication. I also think for like coordination, where we have a meeting today, here's the agenda, the details of what needs to be done, being on time, the meeting's going to run from 8 to 9:30, and just basic preparedness, right? So that might be another level of why people are actually communicating. I think kind of very much like what I'm trying to offer, using words to teach, to share information and be able to instruct. Okay, another reason why. I also think maybe you're wired this way. A lot of times people will simply talk out loud. They are speaking and using words to brainstorm or process through pieces of information. Maybe you have an idea and you want to just kind of talk it out. Maybe you're creating and imagining. It's another, brainstorming is just such a huge way that we use words. Totally fine if you know that that's actually what you're doing. Another reason why I think we communicate is to try to make a decision. Pros, cons, different things that we're trying to sort through, both sides of a decision. And sometimes talking that out and being able to play both sides can be really helpful. So I think decision making might be another reason why you're actually using words. Most of the ones we're talking about now are pretty practical. I almost imagine them like as logical and kind of moving down a little bit more. And they're kind of basic reasons why people are communicating. And what I find is that even that can go pretty wrong. There can be errors made or mistakes, maybe even hurt feelings on the practical level. But as I started to really think about deeper, more significant reasons why people are using words and they're trying to actually communicate, there were some deeper levels that I think moved down further into like more the emotional realm and more of the vulnerable territory. I think oftentimes people will use words to understand, to be understood. Such a fundamental need that most people have to be understood. And perhaps I'm asking you questions and then trying to investigate certain pieces in order to understand where you're coming from, what your feelings are, what your motives were about things. It's a much different, more intimate, more delicate way to communicate when we know that there's a deeper level that's attached to that. So the need to understand or the need to be understood is another reason why I think people will use words. And then I also think it's one of the last ones I was thinking about was just expression, like basic ways that people use words in order to express themselves. Maybe you got the job or you went on a great date last night, or like different things started to happen and you want to express that. And you convey emotion and maybe a lot of gestures. But I also think that on a much more vulnerable, deeper level, that maybe there's some hurt, some sadness, worry, or fear attached to what you're actually wanting to share. Maybe you have some needs attached to your words. And if you are self-aware and conscious about why you're actually speaking and know that you have words or needs attached to your words, it's a whole other conversation. Maybe you want to communicate your boundaries and assert yourself, the limits of what you feel comfortable with and what you don't, or maybe just even your preferences. Do you see all of the reasons? Do you see how many kind of jobs, so to speak, there are? That if you're just using words, AKA the hammer, to just kind of get the job done all the time, and you're not conscious of what tool you're picking up or why you're picking it up, you can start to see where things could go a little bit wonky. The heart of communication is connectedness. And yet one of the things that I believe is fueling so much pain in the world is that we're not connected at all. Most people aren't even connected with themselves. I think that being connected begins internally with this level of self-awareness. Why am I talking? And what is it that I'm needing? What am I trying to convey? And what am I trying to receive? When you start there as your beginning point for communication, that you're more increasingly self-aware with things, you're going to be deliberate about the words that you select, maybe even the gestures and the body positioning of how you begin to communicate with other people. I believe that who you connect with on a consistent way will really define your level of well-being, happiness. Right? I think it fundamentally matters. So in my practice all the time, people are coming in so much pain, so much turmoil, and in oftentimes working against themselves, using words, even in a sabotaging, self-destructive way, all kinds of hurt feelings and lots of misperceptions. They say there's about 3 sides to every story. Maybe that's true. Maybe there's even more, but they say that there's your side, my side, and the truth, right? I really believe that because of miscommunication, just basic miscommunication, errors are made, feelings are hurt, relationships are in conflict or potentially ending, and maybe even wars beginning with each other. People are often completely unaware of what they're saying, how they're saying it, and even why they're saying it. Communication is absolutely vital, and it is the beginning point of self-awareness. We're going to talk when we come back. I'm going to go through the top 10 things of what not to do. We're not going to address all of them today. I'm just going to approach the first 5 just to get you tuned in and a lot more aware. So when we come back, I'll go through all 10, and then we're going to take some time to dive in a little bit deeper so that you can have a beginning point. So I am Allyson Blythe, and this is the Ally Effect, authentically living life your way. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're back here on the Ally Effect, authentically living life your way. Today, we're talking about the top 10 things of what not to do in communication. I'm going to go through right now, and I'm just going to list the top 10 patterns, and then we'll take some time to dissect each one of these so you have a much deeper understanding. So here's the top 10. Criticize, attack, and scrutinize. Demand and impose. Hinting, passivity, and suggesting. Always and never. Judgments and labels. Personalize, jumping to conclusions, assigning motives, complain and criticize, sarcasm and humor. Now, I can almost hear your laughter from here. If you're anything like me, you're kind of going, oh my gosh, like all 10, like all 10 of those. Yeah, maybe you're seeing yourself. You can recognize some of your own patterns. Maybe you see them in yourself. Maybe you see them in your home, your workplace, your neighborhoods. The truth is that these are all incredibly common. I don't know if I can go a day without hearing some of these. And so understanding that though they're common, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're very healthy. I can almost hear my mom's words now, like, well, if everyone was jumping off a bridge, would you too? Right? This idea that everyone might be using them. And yet, again, if we take the time to look around the world and see where is it that things are going off the rails, any of those top 10 will start to bring your message. Remember, we talked about the reasons why people are communicating and understanding that these are the patterns that get in the way. And I think the reasons or how they get in the way is they can interrupt even the most basic level of communication. Remember, we talked about sometimes you're using words only to gather or collect, to offer information. And so if that's really the case, that you're just giving information, but you're making an assumption about things, you can see that even at the most primitive level, things can start to go wrong even there. Any of these top 10 are likely to evoke some level of defensiveness, hostility, certainly hurt feelings, they're going to disconnect you from yourself. Remember, authenticity, and one of those tools is self-awareness. When you're so engaged in any of these top 10, you're focused on the problem. You're focused certainly probably on the other person and engaged in probably the blame game of what happened, what the other person did, didn't do, how it affected you. These patterns will certainly shut down any level of connection or understanding that you have with people, and even certainly the people that you care about the most. And over a period of time, they will definitely erode the safety and the trust that's involved in the relationships. And maybe this is a lot like sugar. Maybe a little bit or occasional use won't necessarily do too much damage. But perpetually, if they're used consistently, you can start to see the erosion and the harm. Because we're talking so much about authenticity, the entire point is to help you understand on a much deeper level how you might be actually getting in your way. Being equipped with this information hopefully puts you in the driver's seat so that you can start to recognize any of these, and you can stop at that point and really start to refocus on actually, why am I talking and what is it that I'm hoping to deliver? So today, my hope is that we get through the first 5. We'll see how much time we have. So I'll go through the first 5 today of what I'm hoping to be able to accomplish. So again, criticize, attack, and scrutinize, demand and impose, hinting, passivity and suggesting, always and never, and judgments and labels. So the first one, criticize, attack, and scrutinize. Bob is a client who I've worked with for quite some time. And over the years, I've heard stories about his son and his son aging, getting to the point of adolescence, right? And if you're currently in the state with somebody in your home who's in adolescence, it's a tough stage. It's a really tough stage. And Bob's son was approaching his 13th birthday. And over the years, he's like, where'd my little kid go? Like, where's my boy? And he could watch him slip further and further away, and spending so much more time underneath his hoodie and in front of the screens. And so Bob desperately wanted to connect with his son. And so he thought it would be a really clever idea, because this is something they did when he was little. Bob went out and bought a baseball and a glove and really wanted to engage with his son in some quality time, get them outdoors, get them away from the screens, and just spend this time. And when he got home, he was excited, he was enthusiastic. And when he introduced it to his son simply refused. He just was completely disinterested and he didn't want to. And so Bob was hurt. He was devastated. He kind of felt pretty powerless. Like, how do you make a 13-year-old get out there and play ball? He took it very, very personally. And so immediately Bob started to launch into this critique and criticism of his son and his athletic abilities, kind of projecting all the way into the future of what kind of man he's going to be. He was incredibly hurt and disappointed, hoping honestly to maybe spur his son into action and awareness. But how willing do you think his son was to engage with him after that? I mean, if anything, Bob kind of sealed the deal with his son. And of course, so the glove and bat had just kind of been sitting in the garage, much to Bob's despair. I wonder for you, how often are you starting a conversation with the things that are hurtful to you, disappointing, things that you don't like, or something that's gone terribly wrong? Are you quick out of the gate to react to something? And do you kind of launch with certain people or in certain situations without necessarily taking the time to inquire or to get some context or perspective about what's actually happened? Are you someone who tends to find fault and you approach conflict with your hurt feelings kind of at large, and you're just kind of blasting through? How do you manage hurt feelings? Like, when something happens, how do you manage that? Are you someone who points out the negative pretty immediately, have a strong reaction to things, and engage kind of in a more hostile, angry way? Any of these patterns, are going to set the tone, the way that you use your posture, your body language, the words that you choose. It's naturally going to evoke, though you might be very hurt, very worried, or maybe just quite fed up by something, it's it's going to evoke some defensiveness from the other person. I took a second to look up scrutiny, and it's examine or inspect closely or thoroughly, right? Like sometimes we will just scrutinize because maybe you want to connect, very much like Bob wanted to connect with his son, but yet he's using this critique as a way to kind of spur action and connection. My friends, it's one of the most sabotaging things you can do. It's like screaming to be heard, right? So remember, why are you talking? If you are trying to connect and you're trying to really deliver a point, are you someone who is launching with this criticize, attack, and scrutinize? That's number one. The second one, demand and impose. I don't know about you, but if you ask me something and it's pretty reasonable, I'm going to make sure I do it. I might even bend over backwards to make sure I get it done. You've asked me. And being asked naturally evokes a sense of cooperation and ease, right? Within reason, of course. The minute someone introduces have to, should, shouldn't, ought to, I'm not going to do it. It might even be something that I originally would have agreed to, but the fact that you have to do this, you shouldn't really do that immediately. I don't know if that's just my spirit or if that's a little bit more human nature. Are you someone who kind of leads with the things that other people have to do, should do, and ought to do? Do you have this, layer your messages with like maybe guilt, obligation, some sense of like imposition of what you think other people should be doing? Should, have to, ought to, they all imply an expectation or perhaps even like a consequence of doing that thing or not doing that thing. It definitely implies like a right or wrong. There's a right way to do something and a wrong way. And this is the way you should or shouldn't be doing something. And this pattern is the demand and impose is certainly going to take away a sense of free will. Remember, if you're asking me something, I kind of know that I've got some choice in that. I've got the choice to say no, and chances are I'm not really going to. But when you take that away with this element of have to, it completely changes the dynamic. And my friends, even with children, not necessarily that we need to be asking our children all the time, but understanding the demand and impose, the way that naturally is going to evoke some level of resistance. Okay. So the last one, hinting, passivity, and suggesting. I don't care how long you've known someone, the role they play in your life, BFF, parent, partner, but I don't care, anything. There is no one who is capable of reading your mind. It doesn't matter how long you've known them. It doesn't matter how much they love you or you love them. It is not possible for another human being to read your mind. Remember that quote from George Bernard Shaw, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place, right? Like this is a huge one. Hinting, passivity, and suggesting. It sure would be nice if, boy, could you maybe think about me every once in a while? You see what I mean? Like hinting, suggesting, and passivity. If you are not taking responsibility for what you want, why am I using words? If you're hinting towards your message, what your needs are, what you're thinking, and what you're feeling, you're completely missing the point. And you may be tying someone into an expectation that they should know how to read your mind. If you really loved me, you would. It's a fallacy, and it's a setup for the other person. You would never walk into a restaurant, no matter how many times you've been there, how favorite your waitress, whatever, it doesn't matter. You would never just go, bring me what I'm hungry for. Come on, you know me, bring me what I'm hungry for. Again, we're deliberate, we're intentional about ordering things up. Oftentimes in relationships, are you slipping into this pattern of hinting and suggesting? You leave flyers on the table of where you might like to go on vacation rather than having that communication. So we've covered 3 so far. We've talked about criticize, attack, and scrutiny. We've addressed demand and impose. And we've also talked about hinting, passivity, and suggesting. When we come back from our break, we're going to talk about 2 more patterns, the top 5 things today of what not to do in communication. So we're back here on the Ally Effect, Authentically Living Life Your Way, talking today about communication. And before the break, we addressed the three patterns, top three things that get in the way of communication: criticize, attack, and scrutinize; demand and impose; hinting, passivity, and suggesting. So I'm wondering, of those three, can you recognize any of them? Do you have a pattern a little bit more? Perhaps you're one way at work. Maybe you're pretty passive at work, but you recognize the minute you get home, you're a little bit more filled with demand and impose. I'm wondering, as you continue to be self-aware, stay tuned for the next two. Let's see if we can dive in. The next one are the easiest to understand and to recognize. This is kind of like, you'll start to see like, oh, oops, wait a minute, misstep right here. Always and never is the next pattern. These are the easiest to spot, and they are, quite frankly, just fighting words. Because if you tell me that I always do something, right? Like, oh, Allyson, you always, I'm going to think of the one time that I didn't do it. And I don't care if it was 35 years ago, I'm going to think about that one time. If you tell me that I always do something or I never do that, it pushes a message to extremes. Okay. And it dilutes it. And though you might be trying to come from a place of frustration or desperation, you're really wanting to get, you never respect me. You never listen to me. You're always at the neighbor's house, right? Like, I'm not always at the neighbor's house. And it evokes this sense of like minimizing your message back, right? You volley always and never to me. I'm going to send it back to you just kind of with this diluted sense, because you've pushed a message, even as desperate or frustrated as you may be, you've diluted your own message. You're also probably trying to argue the heat and fury of a lot of past experiences, maybe understandably, but there's probably a lot of history to the message you're trying to deliver, rather than being able to actually talk about this experience and what you're needing. Why am I using words? If you're using words to convey 25 years worth of history, it's going to be quite some words, right? Always and never, being mindful. Those are some patterns you can spot really quickly. The next one is judgments and labels. And it reminds me of my client, Nick. Nick came to me. He came to me because of some relationship issues. He had just been served his third set of divorce papers. And the realization that he had kind of gone through multiple relationships over his life. He had been fired, had multiple jobs, had been fired several times. And Rick was a fantastic person, but the realization that he just kept fumbling in life. He kept fumbling in relationships and couldn't necessarily understand what was happening in school. So I gather information when clients come in. I always like to get as much information to understand them as a whole human being. And Dave, I keep calling him Dave, sorry. He talks pretty clearly about this idea that all the way back in childhood, he had these experiences where he was just labeled. He just was labeled as the bad one. He would misbehave a lot. They identified him as lazy. And on those report cards, how we get those things that say doesn't work up to potential, right? Doesn't apply himself. Every single report card that he had, Rick would have that as identified as part of who he was. Later in life, quite frankly, high school, he would act out, he would rebel, he'd typically get really poor grades. And eventually, even at 16, the first chance he could, he actually dropped out of school. Those labels of dumb, irresponsible, lazy, troublemaker, they continued to follow him throughout most of his relationships and certainly the workforce. And it just became who he saw himself as. This became something that he bought into as the truth about himself. He was as sick and tired of himself as other people were of him. And he and I spent most of our time together working on relationships, but he was teetering on some more trouble at work. And thank God to be able to, instead of just firing him, they actually put him through some training. They sent him all the way back to the beginning and worked with him. And during the course of this training, Rick was introduced to the word dyslexia. And when they described dyslexia, he actually began to cry, because for the first time, someone had an understanding of what his life was actually like. And the realization that Rick was not stupid, dumb, lazy, irresponsible. He had dyslexia and later was even diagnosed with attention deficit. But the problem is that very early on, a label became solidified and people saw him consistently through that label. It became predetermined and he bought into that himself. I wonder for you, is there someone or something that you see through a predetermined lens? It happens all the time in society, race, ethnicity, gender, culturally, we do it all the time. It's like seeing someone through a crooked pair of glasses or maybe even like a dark set of lenses. It alters the view that we have on the person. We begin to see them as this label. Perhaps on a more intimate level, there's someone who you recognize and you see them through this label. You're so lazy. You're an alcoholic. You're a cheater. You're so controlling. You're just like your mother. Right? These patterns of how we label, and we begin to lose sight of the actual person. Are you someone who is seeing a person, a situation through a lens and filtered kind of with these judgments and predetermined labels out of maybe your own pain and your own frustration? You've now been introduced to the top 5: criticize, attack, and scrutinize, demand and impose, hinting, passivity, and suggesting, always and never, judgments and labels. We've really only touched the tip of the iceberg, right? I mean, we've gone through all different kinds of capacities. Remember, I told you like 3 billion results. The realization that we talked about the history of communication and the ways that it's advanced throughout all of these years, and all the way from cave paintings to Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter and all of that kind of stuff. And yet the realization that though we have all of this technology, the destruction and the ways that we're actually not really effectively communicating. And so today I wanted to offer you a starting point, an opportunity to begin to tune in this tool of self-awareness so that you could be conscious of where it is that you're actually getting in your way and having an opportunity to be able to dig in and do it differently. So join me next time as we venture into the next 5 right here on the Ally Effect, authentically living life your way. As we go over the 5 that we just talked about, just for a quick review to help you tune in and recognize where you've been misstepping over the past couple of weeks. And then also equip you with 5 more to keep building your toolbox, this tool of self-awareness and authenticity. This is the Ally Effect, authentically living life your way. You can join me the first and third Thursday right here on Transformation Radio. I look forward to joining with you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ally Effect with Allyson Blythe. The moment you decide to take control of your own well-being, you start the journey of authenticity. Tune in next time for more empowering conversations and practical tools to help you shed your fear, worry, comparison, and less than beliefs. Stick with us as you step into the driver's seat and head off onto the road of success and happiness. Your best life awaits.